There is a tiny hollow clay ball sitting in a glass case inside the Louvre Museum in Paris. It was excavated from the ancient city of Susa in what is now southwestern Iran, and it dates to roughly 5,500 years ago, around 3,500 BC. To the naked eye, it looks completely unimpressive. It's unadorned, rough, and baked from river mud. But inside that hollow ball, which archaeologists call a bullae, are tiny hand-molded clay shapes: cones, spheres, cylinders, and triangles. And here is the detail that should keep you up tonight. Before the ancient Mesopotamian administrator sealed that wet clay ball 55 centuries ago, they pressed those tiny tokens into the soft outer surface to leave distinct impressions, and then baked the entire sphere shut in a kiln. Why go to all that trouble? Because whoever dispatched that shipment across the desert was terrified that someone along the trade road was going to steal 3 jars of sesame oil or 2 head of cattle. The sphere was an unhackable ancient lockbox. If you arrived at your destination, the recipient broke the clay sphere open. If the tokens inside didn't match the impressions stamped on the outside, someone had tampered with the shipment. Think about what that object represents. 5,500 years ago, there were no paper bills, no banking networks, no digital databases, and no gold coins. Just 2 human beings who needed to exchange real, physical wealth across miles of wilderness, and a sudden, terrifying realization: we cannot trust each other's word. So we invented a physical representation of debt. Which brings us to the central question that has divided philosophers, economists, anthropologists, and military historians for centuries. Did humans invent money as a clever, rational tool to simplify market trade, or is money something far darker? The physical manifestation of an ancient, biological compulsion to track who owes what to whom. If you took an economics course in school, you were almost certainly taught a neat, logical, and deeply comforting story about the origin of money. It usually starts with Adam Smith and his 1776 masterpiece, The Wealth of Nations. The story goes like this. Once upon a time, before money existed, primitive human societies operated under a pure system of barter. If you were a hunter with a surplus of venison and you needed a pair of leather shoes, you had to find a cobbler who happened to have shoes and desperately wanted venison right at that exact moment. Economists call this the double coincidence of wants. As societies grew larger, this constant friction became unbearable. How do you buy a handful of berries with half a cow? To solve this logistical nightmare, humanity supposedly came together and agreed upon a single, universally desirable commodity like salt, cowrie shells, or gold to serve as an intermediate step. And just like that, money was born. It is a clean, rational, elegant story. It makes human economic progress look orderly and inevitable. And according to modern anthropology and archaeology, it is almost entirely made up. In 2011, anthropologist David Graeber published a monumental re-examination of the historical record titled Debt, the First 5,000 Years. Graeber pointed out a glaring problem with Adam Smith's theory. In the entire global record of anthropology, there's not a single documented example of a self-contained society that relied on spot barter as its primary internal economy. When anthropologists studied isolated hunter-gatherer bands or early village communities, they found that people didn't stand around trading 3 fish for 1 stone axe on the spot. They used informal credit. If your neighbor needed meat today because their hunt failed, you gave them meat. You didn't demand 2 flint arrowheads immediately. You held an implicit social understanding that when your family was starving next winter, your neighbor would share their hearth with you. Money didn't start as a shiny coin used to buy a loaf of bread in a busy market square. Money started as a ledger. It started as an accounting tool for human obligation. To understand why human beings are so obsessed with tracking debt, we have to look outside our own species. We have to look at our closest living evolutionary relatives. In 2005, economists Keith Chun and Laurie Santos at Yale University conducted a famous experiment with capuchin monkeys. They introduced a completely novel concept to the monkeys: silver currency. They trained the monkeys to understand that handing a small silver disc to an experimenter would yield a slice of apple or a grape. What happened once the monkeys understood the exchange rate shocked the researchers. The monkeys didn't just learn to buy food. They began displaying almost every irrational financial behavior seen in humans. They engaged in price shopping when researchers changed the great quantities. They showed severe loss aversion, reacting with anger when an experimenter promised 2 grapes but only handed over 1. And in one documented instance, researchers observed a male monkey exchanging a silver disc with a female monkey in exchange for grooming and mating, after which the female monkey immediately took that silver disc and used it to purchase a grape from a researcher. Think about what that experiment reveals. The biological architecture required for currency, tracking relative value, calculating trade-offs, holding social expectations across time, isn't a sophisticated invention of modern civilization. It is built directly into primate social cognition. For millions of years, social primates survived through a mechanism evolutionary biologists call reciprocal altruism. I pick ticks off your back today. You help me drive off a rival male tomorrow. To survive in a primate group, you have to possess a mental ledger. You have to remember who shares, who hoards, who owes you a favor, and who cheated you last month. Money wasn't a sudden invention cooked up in a vacuum. It was the moment human culture took an ancient primate instinct for tracking social favors and projected it onto inanimate objects outside the human mind. For 90% of human existence, roughly 200,000 years, humans lived in small, nomadic hunter-gatherer bands. In a group of 30 or 40 people where everyone is related by blood or marriage, informal mental ledgers work perfectly. You know everyone's name. You know who is generous and who is a free rider. Your memory is the bank. And then, roughly 12,000 years ago, came the single most disruptive event in human history, the Neolithic Revolution. Humans domesticated plants and animals. We stopped moving. We settled down in permanent agricultural communities along the Fertile Crescent, the Yellow River, and the Nile. And the moment we settled down, we created something that had never existed on Earth before: immovable wealth. A field of wheat that took 6 months of backbreaking labor to cultivate cannot be picked up and moved when trouble arrives. A granary filled with tens of thousands of pounds of barley cannot hide. Within a few thousand years, agricultural efficiency caused human populations to explode. Tiny hamlets grew into sprawling cities like Uruk and Lagash, housing tens of thousands of people. For the first time in human evolution, you were living shoulder to shoulder with thousands of complete strangers, people whose names you didn't know, whose lineage you couldn't trace, and whose personal character you could not verify. How do you maintain a web of credit and debt when you no longer know the person standing in front of you? Enter the world's first centralized bureaucrats, the temple priesthoods of ancient Sumer. The temples were not just places of worship. They were massive economic engines that operated as central banks, tax collection centers, and agricultural distribution hubs. Farmers brought their grain, wool, and livestock to the temple as tribute or tax obligations. To keep track of millions of pounds of grain entering and leaving temple vaults, the priests realized that human memory was useless. They needed an external, objective memory. So they invented writing. The earliest written records on Earth, cuneiform tablets from 3200 BC, are not epic poems, legal codes, or religious hymns. They are tax receipts. They are lists of barley shipments, beer rations, and sheep inventories. Writing was invented by accountants to track human debt. In ancient Mesopotamia, the official unit of accounting was called the shekel. But if you could travel back to 2500 BC and ask a Sumerian merchant to show you a shekel, they wouldn't pull a shiny metal coin out of their pocket. The shekel was not a coin. It was a standardized unit of weight, specifically equivalent to about 180 grains of barley or roughly 11 grams of silver. Silver was used by merchants to settle big international transactions, while ordinary citizens paid for daily goods using bushels of barley credited against their accounts at the local tavern or temple. His system worked remarkably well for over 2,000 years. But it had one critical flaw. Every time silver was transferred, It had to be weighed and tested for purity using touchstones and scales. If a merchant shaved off a fraction of a gram or mixed copper into the silver, the entire system of trust broke down. Which brings us to the coast of modern-day Turkey, around the year 600 BC, and the kingdom of Lydia. The Lydians did something that revolutionized human commerce. They created the world's first standardized, state-issued coinage made from electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver found in local riverbeds. Notice the crucial detail on these early coins. They were stamped with an official emblem, the roaring lion of the Lydian king. That stamp changed everything. It was a royal guarantee of weight and purity. You no longer needed to weigh the metal on a scale or scrape it against a touchstone. If you saw the king's lion, you knew precisely what it was worth upon penalty of death. Within 2 centuries, the invention of coinage spread like wildfire across the Mediterranean, adopted by the Greek city-states, the Persian Empire, and eventually Rome. Why did coins spread so quickly? Not just because of market trade, but because of war. As empires expanded, kings needed to pay vast armies of mercenary soldiers who were fighting far from home. You couldn't pay a Greek mercenary in Anatolia with a granary full of barley located back in Babylon, but you could hand him a leather pouch full of standardized silver coins. The soldier could carry those coins across mountains, buy rations from local villagers, and eventually bring his wages home. Coins were the ultimate portable technology for projecting state power and military force. Which brings us to the core psychological mechanism that makes money function, and a deeply unsettling reality hidden beneath our modern financial system. If you take a $100 bill out of your wallet, what are you actually looking at? It is a small strip of cotton linen fiber coated in green ink. It has virtually no intrinsic value. You cannot eat it. You cannot build a shelter with it. You cannot fashion a weapon out of it. And it makes an extraordinarily poor blanket. Yet, a complete stranger will hand over hours of hard physical labor or give you real life-sustaining food in exchange for that printed piece of paper. Why? Historians and social scientists call this collective intentionality a shared myth. Money works if, and only if, millions of complete strangers simultaneously share the belief that millions of other strangers will accept that object tomorrow. Money is not a physical object. Money is a social agreement enforced by collective trust and state power. The moment that shared trust vanishes, the illusion evaporates instantly. During the hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic in 1923, money lost its value so rapidly that workers were paid twice a day and brought wheelbarrows to carry their cash home before nightfall. People burned stacks of German marks in fireplaces because the physical paper had more thermal value as fuel than its monetary face value on the market. When the collective belief died, the money reverted back to what it always was, cheap paper covered in ink. So, how did humans invent money? We didn't invent it in a single moment of intellectual genius, nor did we stumble upon it through primitive village barter markets. Money emerged slowly, over thousands of years, as an evolutionary response to scale. The evolutionary seed was our ancient primate drive for social reciprocity and debt tracking. The structural catalyst was the agricultural revolution, which forced millions of strangers to live together alongside immovable wealth. The administrative technology was the creation of written accounting ledgers by early temple states to record debts. And the final evolution was turning those ledgers into physical coins, paper notes, and digital bits that could travel across oceans in seconds. The probability that money is merely a neutral, convenient tool for market trading is zero. The probability that money is a social technology engineered to measure trust, power, and obligation across time and space is nearly 100%. The 5,500-year-old clay sphere in the Louvre held tiny tokens representing sheep and grain. Today, we tap glass screens to transfer invisible strings of binary code across continents in milliseconds. The medium has changed beyond recognition, but the underlying human drive remains identical to the day that ancient Sumerian scribe pressed wet clay shut. We are still trying to find a way to trust strangers in an uncertain world, and we measure the distance between us and ledger entries.